I'm Senator Jeff Smith, and our guests today I want to hear more about smart justice and about the movement that's happening that I find to be very, very important and actually exciting. I think in my lifetime I've seen these movements before, and they falter and they fall apart and nothing happens. And I will probably say several times during the course of this couple conversations we're going to have is to remind folks to keep on keeping on, and because we can't let such an important topic of smart justice and equality for all disappear because politicians ignore it and move on without doing something. So I'm going to start with introducing both Selika Lawton and professor at the university. And as before each of you start your before we start the conversations, I'd like you to introduce yourselves, and David Carlson from Eau Claire. So give us a little background about yourselves, if you don't mind, Selika.
I have a PhD in military and African American history from Ohio State University. I've been teaching at UW-EC it'll be 28 years in the fall. And I've published in the areas of armed self-defense, as well as implementation of technology and racial integration on the battlefield. So I'm here with two hats on. I am the president of Uniting Bridges, our race building organization here in Eau Claire, but I'm also the Chippewa Valley Executive Board state representative to the state of Wisconsin's ACLU. And I've worked with the Smart Justice Campaign now for 2 years.
Great, thank you. David?
My name is David Carlson. I am the Eau Claire County Regional Organizer for the Rights for All campaign under the ACLU of Wisconsin. So kind of like a sister campaign to Smart Justice. My background, I have quite a few different experiences in life. Two of the more significant ones and the most applicable ones to my work in criminal justice reform are my military service. I was a Wisconsin Army National Guard soldier, deployed twice to Iraq, 2004 and 2007. And then incarceration as an adult in 2010, between 2010 and 2016, I did just under 5 years incarcerated. So I have both of those experiences, and I came up and grew up in a lot of poverty and a lot of crime. And I did juvenile sentences when I was younger, also prior to being adopted, which being adopted was my connection to Northern Wisconsin. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, and Selika was actually one of my professors, my favorite professor, and the professor that I learned the most from. So, and I will state that proudly every time.
And David's always been one of my favorite students. And now I get to call him friend.
All right, we don't have enough time for all that. So, well, let's get started. Selika, I think we'll start with you giving us a rundown of what smart justice is, but mostly how is smart justice different from the bumper sticker defund the police message that we're hearing so much right now?
Well, smart justice really emphasizes the idea that what we need is smart policing linked with changes to the parole system and the justice system. It doesn't just look at the police, it looks at the entire justice system and talks especially about if we can save money by doing certain things, it will actually increase the effectiveness of the police and allow us to reinvest that money in different areas. So one of the things it would argue for, which overlaps with defund the police, is banning no-knock raids. And when you look at no-knock raids, police and innocent citizens are more likely to be hurt or killed by them. The city of Dallas's police force has already banned them. The state of Kentucky has already banned them. And we don't even have a Supreme Court case saying they're legal because there's a problem with them in terms of the Fourth Amendment. So removing them would actually be safer for the police and for the citizenry. You know, adopting the Memphis model of policing, which is not a part of Defund the Police, although there's parts of it in there. And this model, which we see here in Eau Claire, involves evidence-based policing. It involves critical intervention. And that is one of the most important things we could do, because that use of force continuum is really, really important. So smart justice is closer to 8 can't wait. And then it adds to this the idea that we need to reform parole. We need to remove determinate sentences and return discretion to judges. We need to look at the administrative rules and remove administrative rules that are petty and that are ineffective, like forcing people on parole to have to report to their parole officer when they get a credit card, forcing them to report when they get a promotion. We also have to look and review laws that make no sense but only serve to create problems for the police and for the citizenry. When we felonize something like selling a single cigarette, which is illegal in Wisconsin, when we felonize 2 kids getting in a fist fight over their crush in high school, we don't just create a school to prison pipeline, we're taking police resources away from where they need to be. And we need to interrogate this war on weed. It's not a war on drugs, let's be honest. It's a war on marijuana. Marijuana is the only non-opiate that is on the schedule of illegal drugs. And there's never been any evidence, there's no research evidence that it's a gateway drug. Alcohol is actually a bigger gateway drug. I don't smoke marijuana, I'm allergic to cigarettes. But we have wasted, if you look at this last 10-year period, over $1 trillion on marijuana enforcement. And we have nothing to show for it. If we could cut back on things like that as a part of smart justice and ban killology, which only makes police nervous and more likely to shoot unarmed civilians, we could solve a lot of these problems in a smart way that would be cost effective, that would also protect rights. And it would aim at the police departments that do have corruption problems and not hit with such a broad brush, if that makes sense.
So,
People don't want to defund the police. They want to move money into training. They want to move money into rehabilitation. But defund the police misses the role that prosecutors play, that judges play, that determinate sentences play, that the 1994 crime bill played, that disparate impact plays. So we really need to go farther, and we need to actually talk about a smart justice that will go directly at the problems and not paint every police officer with a broad brush.
you must have been reading my mind just as you said that, Selika. I was going to ask that question. And so, David, when we hear defund the police, is that what you think of when you hear that term, defund the police, smart justice, and is that a better way to consider what defund the police means?
Yeah, so for myself, in my understanding of defund the police, it's defunding certain programs and practices that reinforce these abuses that we've seen. So for instance, like the no-knock raids. In Wisconsin, most of the Wisconsin Supreme Court decisions and the federal Supreme Court decision, which was a case that took place, Richard v. Wisconsin, took place at the federal level though. The decision was that knock and announce raids were the typical form of raid unless you applied for a warrant. for a no-knock raid. But then in Wisconsin, during the escalation of the drug war, so 97, 98, 99, we have police officers going in and asking for a no-knock raid because of the suspicion that people were going to get rid of the evidence, which is the drugs, and a lot of times marijuana. So now we have a situation where police are breaking into a house or a room. In the case of Richards v. Wisconsin, it was a hotel room. And really you're forcing the issue of now violence is more likely to occur. And I can say that from personal experience because when we did high value target apprehension in Iraq in 2004. And the point was to force the issue. When we were going after identified enemy combatants, the point was to kill them. So we kick the door and we go in the house with the objective of either killing them or detaining them for information, but either was on the table. So now when I see these no-knock raids happening in the United States, under any circumstance that isn't the most dire circumstance where it is just completely necessary to go in, I see that that's the mentality, is that we're forcing the issue, that it's okay that to get my evidence, my marijuana or the cocaine or whatever it is they want for evidence, it's okay for either a police officer to be killed or the individual in the house to be killed. And so those kind of tactics are most prevalent with drug war operations. And that's where a lot of the defunding is where people are talking about with the defunding, narcotics squads, drug task force operations, things like that, that take a combative, they have a combative presence. They use no-knock raids. They are the most likely to come into engagements like we call in the military, or small arm engagements or different levels of violence from the people's houses they're going to. And we don't, in the United States, it's not worth it to get a certain quantity of marijuana or cocaine so they can make a case.
Can I jump in here too and say, when you're looking at northern Wisconsin, there's a lot of hunters here. And if somebody breaks into your house without announcement in black tactical gear at 4:30 in the morning, what will your average northern Wisconsinite do? They're going to shoot. And a lot of us up here have shotguns. So for the police, this is about the most ineffective and inefficient way to do this. When I'm talking to when I'm talking to actually the chiefs and saying, so why do you have APCs? Why do you have the battle
Armored
tank?
personnel carrier.
Armored personnel carrier. They also have what's called a batter ram, which is really a small Sheridan tank that's outfitted for civilian use. Why do you have them? And they said, in case there's dangerous people and in case we have a hostage situation. Well, that's what they're meant for. If you're going to have an APC, use it with a knock warrant. If you're going to have this stuff, use it properly. And there's no need to have so much of it. That gets us into the civil forfeiture, which is another animal that the ACLU would love to see gone. But the honest to God truth with no-knock raids is they get, especially when you get the wrong address kind like Breonna Taylor, innocent civilians and police officers killed. You are more likely to get killed with a no-knock raid than with a planned announced raid. You look at the stats on that, and I don't see why any sheriff, and we have several sheriffs in northern Wisconsin who want to keep them. And I'm looking at them, do you want to get your own people killed? Why? And that's because for them, it becomes a partisan, I'm sorry, I'm from Louisiana, and we pronounce things a little differently. Issue. I'm looking at it from the ACLU stance, which is that we want to protect citizens' rights, and that includes not killing police or citizens unnecessarily. So that's why smart justice to me makes more sense than defund the police.
And you bring up a good point, Selika, that I don't think a lot of us think of, that yes, many of us do have our shotguns in our house that we have, of course, for hunting purposes, but you're waking and in shock. You're going to do things that you might not have considered doing before. So I got a couple of more questions here in this segment that, for instance, so I want to combine them here. So how does qualified immunity hurt citizen homeowners, and what direct reforms are easy to do that will protect police, increase efficiency, and protect citizens from brutality?
Well, one of the problems with qualified immunity is while the police officer is shielded for abusive behavior, the city is not. So you look at a city like Milwaukee, or you look at a city like New York, and they're paying out millions per year. Not over a 10-year period. I'm saying per year, because qualified immunity encourages the kind of behavior and abuse of power we don't want to see. The other problem is the Supreme Court in this past session said that if the police get the address wrong and they use a batter ram to tear your house down, they don't have to compensate you. That was one of the most recent decisions.
Yeah.
If you're a citizen and qualified immunity says that the police get to make a mistake and take the single greatest source of your wealth, your house, and they don't have to pay for that, that's a giant problem. That for a homeowner, that's a giant problem. So the removal of qualified immunity, and we go back to reasonable immunity, or we go back to reasonable person, is not going to mean that police won't get to be reasonable. It means that we will now have a standard that can be met, because qualified immunity says, strict qualified immunity, as the Supreme Court has said, means that you have to take each and every case and look for an exact match precedent. There are no exact match precedents. Every case is going to be different. Applying a reasonable person standard or a reasonable police officer standard is one that makes a lot more sense. And then you can use the police professionalization standards and you can hold people to a reasonable standard.
And in case folks missed it, the Supreme Court decision was over a case of, I think the police were chasing a shoplifter who ran into someone's home and holed themselves up. And by the end of the day, they had destroyed that house. And they were never, the homeowners who had nothing to do with the case were never compensated and took them to court. And that was unfortunately the decision, that they wouldn't be compensated. So that's a good example.
Those homeowners had nothing to do with it. They weren't shoplifters. They were just innocent victims.
Yeah.
And the police's decision to ultimately use tear gas and a batter ram meant they lost the single greatest source of their wealth. Most of us, our homes are our biggest investments.
Yeah.
And that puts you behind the 8 ball, and it's not even it's not your fault.
Yeah. So David, so beyond that, what direct reforms are easy in your mind that to protect the police and the citizens?
Just more of a presence of it. We've talked about like social workers in crisis situations joining a police officer. I would argue that just like the VA uses the Veteran Administration for veterans, military veterans, the Health Administration. They use recovery coaches and peer support in treatment centers, in post-traumatic stress disorder treatment centers. These individuals are people who have this lived experience, but then they also have training in dealing with individuals that are also coming back off those experiences like combat and need someone that has similar experiences to talk to. This is something that could be implemented very easily because there's a lot of providers in the community who have the lived experience, but then also the training to approach people in crisis situations. So then you have the security element, which is what law enforcement is for. But then the person that is really mediating that confrontation is a person that's trained in it. So I think that is a reform that could immediately be be implemented.
Yeah, so do both of you, so come, you got to think of, or hopefully help me out here, because as a legislator, I would be more than happy to introduce legislation and certainly sponsor legislation that helps us move in the right direction. But of course, politics has a great deal to play with what we can do and what we realistically can do, and what may be really difficult and take a long time. So I guess what I'm looking for is, what is that easy, let's get it done right away thing, like you just suggested, David, right there. There must be more than one thing, though. And then what is the long term that you see politically, the political fight that we're going to have for the ultimate goal, maybe in the next few years?
Is that for both of us or just for
Yes,
David?
that's for both of you.
I would say banning the no-knock raids. I would say amending Act 10 to take out the words except police and fire unions, so that police unions will now be in the same limitations that other unions have. I would say mandating evidence-based policing through the police professional standards and use of force continuums that can be defended, and banning civil forfeiture, because I have never met a civilian who thinks that having the police take your cash when they can't arrest you and making you go to court to prove that it is not related to drugs. I've never seen anybody say that that's a smart thing to do or even a fair thing to do. Those are easy, and they're a big bang for the buck. I think they would be bipartisan, especially when you talk about not taking people's property.
Yeah.
David, I don't know which ones you'd add.
So I think that, one that I already stated was there being an intermediary that is able to, in the situations that aren't immediate, like a threat to a civilian, having an intermediary there, which is either a peer support, mentor, recovery coach, whoever, along with the police to crisis responses. I think that also police contact with people in the community, especially when we're talking about black and brown, we have such an overwhelming crisis of individuals on extended supervision and probation and parole, that police contact is more likely. It's more likely because, for say a simple rule violation, the probation officer, probation agent calls the police, and this police is sent out to an individual's house who is trying to make it already, where it's difficult because you have a felony, you're on probation, you're on supervision, you're stressed out, and now you have the law enforcement coming to your house because you're accused of violating a rule. So all of that whole scenario, which in the 2017, 25% of individuals sent to prison were on these crimeless revocations. In a situation where those could be eradicated, well, then we have a lot less police contact, and maybe someone, once again, like a peer support or a social worker, can be responding to those situations. How can we pull this person up instead of dragging them down? So crimeless revocation is a huge driver of a lot of these situations we see happen.
Banning private prison, banning contracts with private prisons, and not sending Wisconsin prisoners out of state.
Yeah.
Would be smart justice. It would save the state money, because if you don't have enough prisoners, you have to pay a penalty. So if you drive crime down, it's a perverse disincentive. So that would be, for me, something that's easy, and it's financially smart. It's been supported as a bipartisan measure. The whole thing with parole is important, because that's why we do have to, I would say, banning at the federal level, they're going to have to limit the 3 strikes and you're out, the 3 strikes and out, and the determinate sentences. But here at the state level, we could limit those because too often 3 strikes, you're out has been used against minor crime and hasn't been used against big drug dealers who have enough money to buy lawyers to buy themselves justice.
Well, I really appreciate this conversation. It's helpful to me, and I hope it's helpful to all of those who are watching today or in the future as we post this on Facebook. You hit the most important, or some of the very important aspects of why our prisons in Wisconsin are overfilled. It's crimeless revocation. It's 3 strikes and you're out, and marijuana, and probably the crimeless revocation may be the one that people need the most education about. They didn't realize that actually it was happening, and I think all 3 of those are so critical for us to consider. Why are we putting people in prison for things like that? And it does cost the taxpayer. So we're going to end it here for now, and we're going to continue this conversation and dig more into the details and localize this in the next conversation. So I appreciate you both being with me for this conversation, and we'll start it again shortly. Thank you.
Hey, Senator Smith, can I interject one thing before we get
Yes.
off? The 3 strikes legislation in Wisconsin is actually called truth in sentencing. So
Yes, you're right.
So I just want to make sure that people are aware of that, so we don't have people that argue that there isn't 3 strikes. Truth in sentencing, which I think passed in 1998, Act 283. That's what, if that were overturned, that would be one way to decrease a lot of these situations that are occurring.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. You're right. Let's make sure we get it right so we don't have to have that discussion to distract us. All right, well, thanks again for being here for this conversation, and we're going to move on. Thank you.